The stone looks right until you lift it toward the gap. One corner hangs in the air, and a mason at Great Zimbabwe enters a private disagreement with granite that has no wish to help. If evenings like this genuinely suit you, you may like the episode or subscribe. Tell me your location and local time. Let the room dim and settle comfortably beside the wall. Before sunrise in the dry season, on the southern African plateau in what is now Zimbabwe, the granite is cool, but your first block will not sit flat. Your ordinary task is to close one opening in a rising course before the sun heats the stone, and the first block has already made a poor beginning. Before the light changes again, you turn the troublesome corner toward your thumb and memorize exactly where the false promise begins. You lower the block without dropping it and rest it beside your foot. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of local Shona-speaking peoples. Colonial claims that outsiders must have made it were a documented political falsehood, rejected by archaeology, and the work in your hands is the plainest answer. You turn back to the gap. The place around you is busy, but not loud yet. A carrier shifts a basket strap. Another mason tests the edge of a course farther along the curve. The names Hill Complex, Great Enclosure, and Valley Ruins belong to modern archaeology, not to the builders, so they will be useful only as directions. Your wall does not need a label this morning. It needs a stone whose broad face lies down completely, rather than one that balances on two proud points and waits for future trouble. The sentence about authorship is finished. Your attention returns to the lower bed, where a grain of quartz catches against your skin. No record preserves this mason's name, so you follow a careful composite made from the surviving walls, the local granite, and documented dry stone practice. That limit matters for a moment, and then the block matters more. You kneel beside the course and sweep grit from the bed with the side of your hand. Loose grains can deceive the fingers. A stone may seem settled while resting on a little ridge of fragments, then shift after rain, heat, feet, and years have worked them away. You run your palm across the exposed top of the lower course. It is not polished. It does not need to be. It offers several broad contact areas, small hollows, and an edge that rises just enough to matter. The gap is not an empty rectangle. It is a particular place shaped by the stones already chosen on either side. That reconstruction gives you no invented ceremony, only a plausible working body, a measured task, and stone that answers pressure honestly. You pick up the first candidate again, this time with less hope and more information. Its upper face is good, its length is nearly right, and from standing height it seems made for the opening. Underneath, however, a shallow knob keeps most of the stone from bedding. You set it down and press opposite corners. It ticks against the course. That small sound is a refusal. Mortar could fill such irregularity in another building tradition, but there is no mortar here, and there is no intention to wish the problem away. Mortar is not missing. Properly chosen, fully bedded stone makes it unnecessary. A wall made from dry stone depends on contact, weight, and friction. The block should spread its load through the course below, instead of concentrating it on a point. You mark the troublesome knob with dust from your thumb. The stone is not rejected yet. It has merely been told where the argument lies. You rub the underside once more, confirming that the two bright contact marks are carrying almost everything while the middle remains untouched. The granite around Great Zimbabwe offers a useful beginning because it weathers into slabs along natural seams. Even so, nature does not produce a complete wall in convenient numbered pieces. The slab in your hands has reached the working pile through selection, splitting, carrying, and rough dressing, but the last decision belongs at the gap. You turn it 90 degrees. The proud knob now falls near an existing hollow, and for one pleasant instant the stone seems cooperative. Then the opposite end projects too far beyond the wall face. A projecting edge would interrupt the visual line and catch feet, baskets, or future repair work. You turn it back. The grandeur imagined by a distant visitor remains absent. There is only a heavy object being rotated several times because one side is almost useful, which is the sort of labor that makes monuments without ever looking monumental. You lay a straight, thin reference stone along the course and sight past it. The wall curves, so the check is not a modern ruler carried across a drawing. You compare the new bed with neighboring courses, with the rise of the face, and with points established by the builders along the sweep. Level does not mean a rigid line forced through every local irregularity. It means the course keeps its intended run without climbing, sagging, or making the next layer correct today's mistake. Farther on, another pair of hands lifts a block, pauses, and lowers it again. That shared rhythm tells you something. Skilled building includes many moments when nothing is added. Refusal consumes time now, so that the wall does not consume somebody else's time later, when a bulge has become a collapse and the original decision can no longer be found. Your eye moves from a nearby joint to the distant end of the course, keeping the local fit inside the wall's longer intention. The sun has not yet cleared the higher granite, but the upper air is whitening. You choose a smaller hammerstone and bring the candidate block onto a stable support. The aim is not to carve it into a perfect brick. Too much striking can waste a usable slab, open a fresh crack, or remove the face that made it valuable. You tap beside the marked knob, listening to the note and watching the grain. One flake comes away, the next blow is lighter. A second flake leaves a shallow scar. You stop before enthusiasm becomes damage. The stone has improved by an amount that would disappoint anyone hoping for spectacle. It may now sit properly. That is enough. The best correction in this work is often smaller than the confidence required to make it. A final brush removes the new flakes, because fragments left beneath the block would turn careful dressing into a different kind of error. You carry the block back 2 steps and lower it into the gap with your fingers clear of the neighboring edges. The first contact is firm. You press the near corner, then the far one. No click. You lean your weight onto the top and feel for movement through your palms. There is a faint give, not a rock exactly, but enough to keep you from trusting it. A thin, high spot on the lower bed may be taking the load. You lift the block again before its weight convinces you to accept what your hands have noticed. Granite is persuasive when it is heavy. It encourages the builder to call nearly good work finished, especially after the third lift. Your back has opinions on the matter. The wall, being intended to outlast your discomfort, receives the final vote. The faint movement is smaller than sight, yet your wrists recognize it, and that private sensation is enough to begin again. A chip no wider than 2 fingers lies among the sweepings. You do not slide it under the uncertain corner as a casual wedge. Small packing stones can have a proper place when they are stable and confined, but a loose sliver beneath a face may crush, work free, or create the very point loading you are trying to avoid. Instead, you inspect the bed. The lower course contains one raised edge, rough enough to catch a fingernail. You rub dust across it, revealing the line. Dressing the block again would thin an already sound face. The better adjustment is to choose a different orientation or a different stone. The gap is teaching you its terms. It wants a block slightly shorter, thicker at one end, and broad enough to bridge the shallow hollow without balancing above it. Instead, you keep the bed honest, accepting the extra lift while the stone is still cool and the course remains open to correction. You return the first candidate to the pile, not to the discard heap. Its nearly flat face may be exact for another opening. Sorting preserves judgment. Stones too small for one course can fill the wall's interior or serve a narrower layer. Stones with a handsome outer face but awkward bedding can wait for a place whose bed matches them. A builder who treats every rejection as waste soon creates more labor than stone. You stand and scan the working pile. Morning light reaches the upper surfaces first, picking out mica and pale feldspar. Several slabs look promising. The flattest looking one is too thin. A thicker one carries a diagonal fracture. The plainest block has the right depth and one dependable face. Naturally, the stone with no visible charm is the one doing the best interview. You lift the plain block from one end, slide a hand beneath it, and bring it close to the wall. It is shorter than the first, leaving room for a small companion stone at the end of the gap that can be sound if both pieces bed fully and their joint does not continue through the courses above and below. Dry stone's strength comes partly from avoiding long, uninterrupted seams. Each course should cross the joints of the course beneath, so the wall behaves as a mass rather than as separate columns. You set the block down without fitting it yet and study the joint below. The new stone will span it. That is good. Its own end joint will fall under the middle of a larger stone planned for the next course. The decision reaches upward into work not yet done. You picture the next layer only as far as the current joints require, leaving later builders room to answer conditions you cannot see. The block enters the gap and settles with a low scrape. You test each corner. The near end stays firm. The far end moves a breath. This time the movement comes from a small depression rather than a proud point. A broad, stable packing piece may be appropriate if it cannot shift, and if it spreads rather than concentrates the load. You select a flat chip, place it deep from the wall face, and lower the block again. The chip disappears beneath the mass, enclosed by neighboring stone. You press. Still. You lift one edge just enough to remove it, and try a slightly broader piece. The second fits better. There is no rule that the first correction must be honored for its effort. The wall remembers only what remains inside it. The broader second chip does not make the stone level by itself. It simply completes contact where the natural surfaces nearly agree. With the block seated, you compare its outer face to the course. It stands a finger's width too proud. That does not automatically condemn it. The wall face is not a glass surface, and the surviving masonry shows variation within disciplined courses. Yet this section is being brought inward as it rises. The gentle inward slope, called a batter by modern builders, keeps the upper mass from wandering outward. You place your hand against stones below and extend the plane upward. The new block should sit slightly behind the one beneath it. Instead, it breaks the intended slope. You could dress the outer edge, but that might remove the block's best face. You rotate it once more. The bedding remains sound, and the projection disappears. An awkward stone becomes a useful one, because the wall asked a different side to be seen. This quieter face will weather outward, while the strongest face carries inward, a compromise made for service rather than display. You step back only far enough to read the curve. The broad base carries more stone than the upper courses, and the face retreats gradually toward the center. Nothing is glued. The stability comes from mass placed where gravity can keep it, contact faces that resist sliding, and courses arranged so local movements do not become open paths through the wall. A tall, dry stone wall is not a heap made tidy. It is a long sequence of controlled choices. You return to the block immediately, because understanding the principle does not close the remaining hand width at its end. The small companion stone must be thick enough to share the bed, wide enough not to spin, and ordinary enough not to tempt you into saving it for a more flattering position. The remaining space looks small, but a loose filler could loosen its neighbors, so the final hand width deserves full attention. The companion stone comes from a basket of smaller pieces, sorted by thickness. You try one. It drops too deeply and leaves its top below the course. Another sits high, creating a ridge that the next layer would have to climb. The third has a broad top but a narrow foot, making it eager to tilt. You put it back. The fourth is irregular on the outside and nearly ideal underneath. You chip one inner corner so it can meet the larger block without forcing it sideways. Then you slide it into the remaining space. Its outer face is less regular than the stones around it, but the course line holds. The wall does not require every piece to look identical. It requires each piece to do its own quiet structural job, while allowing the next one to do the same. You place both palms across the new pair and press in turn. The larger block does not rock, the smaller does not rotate. Their joint is close without being forced, and both sit below the intended line for the course top, by no more than the surrounding variation. You brush away loose grit and look along the face. The gap is closed, but the test is not finished. A stone may feel steady under a downward push and still move when pressure arrives from the side. You nudge the smaller piece inward, then outward. It stays confined. You lean against the larger block. Its weight passes into the bed rather than rolling across a high point. Your body receives no answering tick. In a craft governed by touch, silence can be a measurement. Only after the side test do you accept the pair, and the next worker begins preparing stone above them without ceremony. Along the curve, the next mason asks for your eye rather than your hands. Their course has risen slightly over several stones, each error too small to accuse on its own. You walk the line, crouch, and compare the top against an earlier reference point. The rise is real. Removing the latest stone may be enough, or the correction may need to begin 2 pieces back. No mortar has hardened around the error, which makes revision possible, though never pleasant. The newest block is lifted. Beneath it, a packing piece is too thick. It is exchanged for a thinner one, and the course drops into agreement. Dry construction is unforgiving about contact, but generous about reconsideration before the next weight arrives. The small correction disappears at once, leaving only a level run and one worker who will remember the unnecessary lift. The altered packing is almost nothing in volume, yet it changes the direction of force enough to restore the whole visible line. You return to your pair and prepare the bed for the next block. The course now has a new edge, a new hollow, and a joint to be crossed. Each successful placement changes the puzzle. That is why a wall cannot be designed only as a finished outline. Its geometry emerges through repeated local judgments held inside a larger intention. You choose a broad slab for the next position because it can bridge both new joints. Its underside is flatter than its top. That is acceptable. The top can receive smaller corrections in the following course, but poor bedding now would transmit instability downward. You lower it, feel a slight rock, turn it, and find the steadier orientation. The movement takes seconds. The knowledge guiding it took much longer to acquire. Your fingertips trace the new upper hollows, already searching for the next slab's likely feet before anyone brings it forward. The plateau's granite does part of the preparation before any builder arrives. Weather enters joints, temperatures change, and broad surfaces shed sheets. People can also persuade suitable rock to split more quickly, a task you will follow later. Here on the wall, however, the useful fact is immediate. Many blocks already possess 2 roughly parallel faces that permits courses to rise without thick beds of binder between them. The mason still has to read every exception. A slab may be flat overall and twisted near one corner. It may carry a hidden fracture. It may be broad but too thin for the load expected above. You tap the current block and listen. The note is even. You inspect the edge. No crack opens. The stone is not perfect. It is dependable in the direction that matters. The dependable direction is downward, where the broad face can receive weight without twisting it toward the exposed edge. By now the sun touches the wall's upper edge. Granite warms slowly at first, then keeps the heat with impressive loyalty. You shift the next stones into shade before they become unpleasant to handle. The early schedule is not a romantic devotion to dawn. It is a practical arrangement between skin, weight, and climate. Cooler blocks are easier to grip, and cooler workers make fewer decisions merely to finish. You drink, wipe your palms, and check the course again. The new pair has not moved under the neighboring placement. Their end joint remains tight. A little dust has collected in the seam. You brush it out so it cannot suggest a false closure. The wall asks for attention that is exact but not frantic, which is fortunate because granite has never shown any interest in being hurried. A carrier arrives with 3 newly sorted blocks and lowers them near the working line. You do not choose by size alone. One has an excellent outer face and a shallow bowl underneath. Another is thick, sound and narrow. The third is broad but carries a feathered fracture along one edge. You ask where the fracture began, and the carrier points back toward the outcrop. The block may still serve if the weak edge lies inside the wall and carries little load, but not in the exposed position ahead. You set it aside for the inner core. The narrow block may pair with another. The bowl-bottomed stone needs more dressing than this gap deserves. Selection is not praise or blame. A stone can be wrong here and useful 2 arm lengths away. The carrier nods, not offended by the refusal, because a block assigned badly at the wall wastes the entire journey behind it. The wall has 2 faces with an interior mass between them. The visible courses receive careful attention, but the inside cannot be treated as a bin for anything inconvenient. Core stones must lock, settle, and avoid large voids that allow movement. You place the fractured block inward with its sound face down, then surround it with smaller pieces that cannot roll. The outer course and inner mass support one another. A hollow core would let faces bulge. Random rubble would settle unevenly. You test the fill by pressing and listening. Then remove one rounded piece that turns beneath your hand. Its shape is better for a drain or another task, not for a confined load. Even the unseen middle asks for the same discipline as the surface admired centuries later. You add one angular stone deep in the core, then remove it when its rounded neighbor begins to roll under the test. As the course extends, the wall's curve changes the direction of every face by a little. You cannot simply repeat the orientation of the previous block. The next piece must follow the arc while remaining stable on its own bed. You choose a wedge-shaped slab whose wider end belongs toward the outside. Placed that way, it fills the curve without opening a large joint. Turned around, it would force neighboring stones apart. You seat it and compare the face with the run below. The batter remains gentle. The course remains level. The stone is slightly darker than its neighbors, a difference that will soften as dust and weather work on it. Structure comes first, but the visual order is not accidental. Regular courses announce skill because skill is what makes them possible. The wedge now follows the arc so naturally that its unusual shape disappears into the regularity of the completed course. Modern visitors often meet the great enclosure as a vast completed form, with a high curving wall and a conical tower within. The purpose of that enclosure and tower is interpreted, not documented. Scholars have proposed royal, ritual, initiation, and other social uses, and the question remains open. For you, the tower is not an answer floating above the work. You are still beside a course, choosing whether a wedge-shaped stone bears well enough to stay. The brief modern aside ends there. You push the block with the heel of your hand, feel no movement, and place the next core stone behind it. Whatever meanings people gave the larger place, the wall could express none of them unless ordinary technical choices kept it standing. Your next action is to place a plain core stone, so interpretation yields at once to weight, contact, and the available gap. A long joint has begun to appear 3 courses below, where several block ends nearly align. It does not threaten the present work, but it warns you not to continue the pattern upward. You select a longer slab that crosses the line completely. It is heavier than 2 smaller stones would be, and lifting it requires another pair of hands. Together you bring it onto the bed, lower one end, then the other, and withdraw your fingers. The first placement is high on the inner edge. You lift again. A small stone beneath has shifted during preparation. It is reset deeper, and the slab comes down level. The extra weight is worthwhile because it ties the visible face across a weakness. Carrying something heavy twice is less satisfying than carrying it once, but more satisfying than explaining a crack to the future. The tied joint changes the topography of the course. A shallow trough remains behind the long slab, and you fill it with 2 stable pieces whose broad sides oppose each other. They are not visible from outside, yet they prevent the slab from rolling inward under later load. The wall's gentle batter directs weight toward the center, but inward does not mean unsupported. Each layer must receive the next without allowing stones to tip into voids. You press the fill with a hammer handle, then replace one piece whose edge crumbles. The sound fragment goes to the small stone basket. It may serve as tight packing elsewhere. Nothing here is precious simply because hands have touched it. Usefulness depends on position, and position changes one stone at a time. After the crumbling edge is removed, the remaining fill locks closely enough that the hammer handle returns no hollow rattle. Heat reaches the working face in a wider band. You wrap your fingers around a pale block and release it sooner than expected. The surface is not dangerous, only insistent. Work slows. That slowing is part of good judgment. A tired hand feels less, and a hurried eye accepts a rising course because the deviation is easier than another lift. You and the others adjust tasks. One worker sorts in shade. Another prepares the next bed. You check the line from farther back, where the curve becomes visible as a whole. No section bulges. The top runs steadily. The inward step is subtle enough that a casual glance might miss it. The wall is leaning into itself, not dramatically, but by the accumulated width of many small decisions. Nobody announces the slower pace. The change moves through the group as naturally as shade retreating from the working pile. You return to the original gap, now buried beneath the next placements. The two stones you chose are no longer special. They have become part of a course carrying new weight. You cannot test their corners directly, so you look for consequences. The block above sits without rocking. The joint has not opened. The outer face holds the intended slope. This is how earlier decisions continue to speak. They do not announce themselves. They make later work straightforward or difficult. A badly seated block may not fall today. It can concentrate pressure, admit movement, and pass the defect upward until rain and time enlarge it. The person harmed by that choice might never know your name. Responsibility therefore extends beyond reputation. It is built into the simple refusal to leave a rocking stone beneath somebody else's future. The consequences remain small today, which is exactly why the mason must imagine their accumulation without inventing a crisis. The explanation promised by the wall can now be said plainly. Mortar was not missing at Great Zimbabwe. It was unnecessary. Granite that offered flat slabs was selected and dressed so broad faces bedded onto the courses below. Joints were crossed, interiors were packed, the run was kept level, and the wall stepped gently inward as it rose. Weight pressed stone onto stone. Friction resisted sliding. The broad mass kept the load where gravity could steady it. None of this means every wall was identical, or every section survived untouched. It means the construction principle did not need glue. You prove it again in the least dramatic way available, by pressing a newly set block and finding that it does not move. The sentence names the principle, but your hands have supplied the proof through every rejected wobble and corrected contact surface. Once the title's answer is clear, the work does not become easier. You still have a gap at the next position, and its shape is worse than the first. One side is bounded by a square block, the other by a slanting end. The lower bed dips toward the center. You search for a piece thick enough to bridge the dip without perching on the edges. A broad slab would solve the bedding, but leave a large outer joint. Two smaller stones would fit the face, but risk settling independently. You choose a medium block and a deep packing piece, then test them together before committing either. The combination sits firm and crosses the joint below. The outer seam remains narrow. No single rule selected it. The choice came from balancing several demands at once. A younger worker watches you lift the block a second time and asks what was wrong with the first position. You show the faint dust marks on two corners and the clean patch between them. The stone had touched at the edges, but not through the middle. Under load, those corners would bear too much. You turn the block and show how the new orientation spreads the contact. The lesson lasts less than a minute. It is transmitted through an object, a hand, and a consequence, rather than through a speech. The younger worker tries the pressure test and feels the difference. Then both of you return to lifting. Skill grows through repeated corrections that may look inefficient to anyone counting only the number of stones added before noon. The younger worker repeats the test on another block and rejects it sooner, turning one explanation into immediate shared practice. The course approaches a section built earlier in the season. Joining new work to settled work requires another judgment. The older end has gathered dust and a few seeds in its joints. You clear them, inspect for movement, and find one small face stone loose. Building over it would trap the weakness. You remove the stone, reset its packing, and seat it again before closing the join. The repair is modest, but it reveals the wall as a maintained structure rather than a single heroic event. Courses are extended, adjusted, and sometimes rebuilt. People return to decisions made by other hands. The standard is not loyalty to the first arrangement. It is stability in the arrangement that remains. The reset face stone now receives pressure from above without shifting, allowing the joining block to cross old and new work cleanly. You choose the joining block long enough to overlap old and new work. Its underside carries a shallow ridge. 2 careful blows take the highest part away. A third would make the surface cleaner, but not stronger, so you stop. The block settles across the meeting point. You check the face, the top, and the inward step. All agree. The curve now reads continuously through the join. You fill behind it, working smaller stones into stable contact, and press the core until nothing turns. Sweat has darkened the dust on your forearms. The granite is fully warm. The useful morning is nearly spent. Yet the wall offers no conclusion. It simply accepts another piece and presents the next gap. The stopped third blow preserves thickness, and the resulting scar disappears when the block takes its final place across the join. Before leaving the face, you walk the length completed since dawn. Your hand travels over edges rather than sliding smoothly, because this is masonry, not polished furniture. You stop at each fresh joint, press where a block might rotate, and sight the top course from both directions. One stone sits a little low. That is acceptable because the next bed can cross it without creating a point. Another projects farther than planned. You reset it now, despite the effort, because the batter matters more than the wish to finish. The course settles into a quiet consistency. Anyone arriving later may see only a band of granite. You can still see the sequence of doubts inside it. At the far end, another mason makes the same inspection, so the completed length is checked from 2 bodies and 2 directions. At the first gap, the plain block and its smaller companion remain hidden beneath new work. You remember which one almost seemed too ordinary to choose. Its lack of drama has become an advantage. It beds fully, crosses the lower joint, receives the upper slab, and asks for no further attention. The rejected block waits in the pile and may serve elsewhere. No material has failed. It has merely not found its place yet. You gather the hammerstone and move the sorted pieces back into shade. The sun now owns the open face. Later work can continue at a slower rhythm, but the delicate choices were made while hands and stone were cool. You pause beside the wall without imagining the centuries ahead. The responsibility is closer than that. Someone will add the next course. Someone may lean a basket against this face. Rain will enter the smallest openings, heat will expand the exposed surfaces, and ordinary use will test what you have done. Your judgment about one block has joined thousands of other judgments, each too small to carry a monument's reputation by itself. That is precisely why it matters. The wall stands through shared craft, not through a single secret and not through anything poured between the stones. You leave no mark claiming the choice, because the intended record is the wall's continued agreement with gravity and weather. When you finally step down from the working place, the chosen block cannot be distinguished from its neighbors. Its outer face catches the same light. Its joint is neither unusually tight nor conspicuously wide. Nobody passing the course will stop to praise the moment when you lifted it twice, removed one flake, rejected a loose wedge, and turned the useful face inward. You live with the decision anyway. The stone does not rock. The course remains level. The wall leans gently into its own weight. That is the end of the morning's problem, and the beginning of another story. Because before any block could test a mason's patience at the wall, somebody had to persuade it to leave the granite hill. The final look is not backward toward achievement, but downward toward footing, where the path leads from wall to quarry. The wall begins again at the outcrop, where a different adult stands with 1 foot on pale granite and 1 on sandy ground. You have come before the hottest part of the day to decide which part of the hill is willing to become portable. The exposed rock is rounded at a distance, but close inspection reveals lines where weather has opened shallow horizontal seams. Thin sheets have already loosened along some edges. Other surfaces are solid and offer nothing but weight. Your goal is not to conquer a boulder. It is to obtain blocks that justify the carrying. You crouch, follow a seam with 2 fingers, and tap at 3 points. The note changes near one end. A slab may release there, provided the line continues beneath the surface rather than ending after the first hand span. Near your ankle, earlier flakes form a shallow fan. Their sizes show where the seam opened easily and where the rock resisted, a record useful for the next choice. The seam, not the size, decides where effort belongs. Granite on the plateau often exfoliates, shedding layers as weather works along joints and curved surfaces. That natural behavior helps explain why regular blocks were available for level courses. But it does not mean every outcrop produces identical slabs. You study thickness, fracture, and access together. A broad sheet wedged beneath a larger mass may be technically useful and practically unreachable. A smaller plate already open at 2 edges may cost less fire, less striking, and fewer injured fingers. You choose the second. The decision resembles thrift more than heroism. A person can admire the larger slab while carrying the smaller one home, which is a sound arrangement when admiration weighs nothing and granite weighs exactly what it weighs. The surface also slopes toward a patch where water has entered before. That stain is not proof of a complete fracture, but it helps decide where the lever should wait. Dry grass and small wood are arranged against the chosen surface, not across the whole boulder. The aim is to heat a limited zone and encourage an existing weakness, not to melt stone or produce a theatrical blaze. Archaeological and historical accounts of plateau quarrying describe fire followed by cooling water as a way to hasten splitting. The thermal change can help a slab separate along natural planes. You keep that claim modest. Fire and water assist the rock's own structure. They do not turn any boulder into neat bricks. While the fuel catches, you clear loose stones from the working side. If the slab releases, footing must remain open. A useful fracture followed by a twisted ankle would be a very complete failure of planning. The cleared ground gives the group room to step back together. Preparation that looks idle from a distance becomes essential at the instant a heavy sheet finally moves. Everyone keeps clear until heat and water have finished their work. Heat gathers against the granite. You do not stand directly over the suspected seam. Another worker watches from the side, holding a lever and waiting for a change that may be felt before it is seen. The fire burns down. Water is brought carefully and applied where the surface has warmed. A sharp sound comes from the rock, then another softer one. The seam lengthens a little. Nothing leaps free. The granite has accepted the suggestion but not the schedule. You wait for the surface to cool enough to approach, then insert the lever into the opening. Pressure is applied slowly. The slab lifts at one end and settles again. The line is real. It merely requires a second attempt and more patience than the first carrying team would prefer. One worker brushes cooling grit from the opening and finds the seam widening beneath a thin lip. The next effort can now follow that lip instead of testing the whole face. The lever returns only after the surface can be approached safely. A smaller fire is set along the stubborn end. The repeated process is not evidence of ignorance. Material varies, and skilled work adapts to what the stone reveals. When the second heating has passed, and water reaches the edge, the fracture answers farther along the seam. This time the lever holds its gain. A second tool enters beside it. Two people press, pause, shift their feet, and press again. The slab separates with a heavy, dull release. Dust lifts from the new face. The sheet is broad, roughly parallel on top and bottom, and much too large to carry as it is. Success at the outcrop has created the next problem immediately, which is common in any production system and particularly dependable when the product is rock. After the release, everyone waits until the sheet lies fully supported. A half-detached slab can shift without warning, and relief is not allowed to become careless approach. The freed sheet is valuable because it can now be divided. You inspect the fresh slab before breaking it smaller. One edge is sound and thick. Another carries a branching crack that could waste a block if ignored. Rather than divide the sheet into equal-looking rectangles, you plan cuts around those weaknesses. A strong central portion may yield two walling stones. The fractured edge can produce smaller core pieces. You mark likely lines with dust and set the slab on supports so the intended break has room to open. Blows fall near the mark, not wildly across the face. The first chip exposes the grain. The second begins a short fracture. You adjust the support and strike again. A portable block separates, followed by a thinner piece suitable for packing. The hill is becoming a sorted set of possibilities rather than a pile of equal units. The uneven fragments are counted by use, not by symmetry. A triangular piece may lock a core better than a prettier rectangle, provided its broad side remains stable. The first block has one broad natural face and a rougher underside. It could go directly to a wall pile for final fitting there, but an obvious spur would make carrying awkward and later dressing inevitable. You remove the spur now. The hammerstone meets the edge at an angle. A flake drops. The block is still irregular, yet it can lie flat in a carrying cradle. Work is divided by usefulness, not by a rigid boundary between quarry and wall. Some shaping happens here because it reduces weight. Some waits because only the final gap can decide what must be removed. You stop before thinning the sound face. Every unnecessary fragment left at the outcrop is weight wisely not carried, but every unnecessary blow can also destroy a face that took centuries of weather to prepare. The removed spur joins a pile of angular pieces. Its sharp shape may later fill a confined pocket, so reducing carrying weight does not necessarily turn material into waste. Stopping early leaves strength where later bedding will need it. Several blocks now rest in separate groups. Broad-facing stones lie with their flattest sides visible. Thick, less regular pieces form a core pile. Thin chips are kept for stable packing rather than scattered underfoot. Cracked fragments sit apart until someone decides whether they can be reduced safely. Sorting is a form of shared memory. A carrier who did not watch the split can still see which pieces deserve careful handling and which are meant for the interior. You lift one block by its ends and turn it once. Its weight is acceptable, but the surface is slippery with fine dust. A quick brushing improves the grip. Carrying begins before the path, in the small preparation that keeps a useful stone from becoming a dropped one. A child-sized chip is moved away from the walking line, and a broad face is covered from direct sun. Order around the pile protects both feet and future gripping surfaces. The sorted ground turns memory into a visible working system. A woven support or simple carrying arrangement spreads the block's pressure, but it does not make the load light. Two adults take this stone because its width makes a single person hold insecure. You lift together on a spoken count, straighten without twisting, and pause before moving. The first steps are across uneven granite. One worker leads backward for a short distance, watching the other's feet. At the sandy edge, both turn. The path toward the wall climbs and falls around exposed rock. Its difficulty is not dramatic enough for a chronicle, only persistent enough to shape every delivery. The builder's achievement includes millions of decisions about distance, balance, rest, and whether a block that could be moved should be moved in this particular form. At the first slope, the carriers shorten their steps. The block's momentum is small but persistent, and a steady count keeps both bodies from correcting in opposite directions. Breathing settles before the pair accepts the first upward grade. The load swings slightly when one foot enters loose sand. You stop at once. Continuing through a bad step would force the other carrier to compensate without warning. Both lower the block onto two waiting stones, keeping fingers out from beneath the edge. A short rest follows. The granite is warming. Dust sticks to damp palms. Above, the destination is visible between walls, which does not shorten the path in any measurable way. You adjust the support, so the block sits closer to the center. On the next lift, the weight feels more even. The stone has not changed, but its relationship to two bodies has. Good transport, like good walling, comes from placing mass where people can control it. During the pause, you inspect the lower edge for a new crack. None has appeared, so the adjusted support is solving a transport problem rather than hiding a damaged stone. At a fork, the shorter route climbs over bare rock, while the longer route keeps to firmer soil. You choose the longer path. A carrier with an empty basket may prefer the direct rise. A pair holding granite benefits from predictability. The decision adds steps and removes surprise. Along the way, you pass smaller pieces cached in shade for later collection. Not every block moves from outcrop to wall in one continuous effort. Staging areas allow sorting, rest, and reassignment. A stone too heavy for the current pair can wait for more hands. A piece discovered to be cracked can be reduced before anyone spends further labor on it. The supply line is flexible because human bodies, unlike finished walls, must recover between loads. Shade marks the resting points almost as clearly as stones do. The route has been learnt through repeated loads, and its safest rhythm belongs to collective experience. A safe detour is still progress when the load arrives sound. The path narrows beside a low outcrop. One carrier calls the turn, and both rotate the block so its longest edge follows the opening. The maneuver works until a projecting corner catches the rock. You lower the load, step back, and inspect. Forcing it through would scrape hands and may start the diagonal fracture noticed earlier. A few dressing blows could remove the corner, but the block's length is one reason it was selected. You decide to carry it around the opposite side, adding another bend. The stone has won a small argument about route planning. It will not receive a medal, and neither will you, which leaves everyone free to concentrate on the next secure foothold. Once around the bend, the caught corner leaves no visible scar. The detour costs minutes, but the sound face arrives intact, which is the only useful accounting. Route choice becomes part of shaping, though no stone is struck. At the next rest place, a mason coming downhill examines the delivery. The broad face is useful, but one end is thicker than the wall pile currently needs. The mason suggests turning the block into two smaller pieces here. You consider the distance already covered and the risk of a poor break. If divided successfully, it will be easier to carry and may fill two gaps. If the fracture runs across the good face, the journey so far has delivered only core rubble. The branching line at the thick end provides a guide. You support the block, strike beside the weakness, and stop after the first answer. The crack follows the intended direction. A second blow completes the split. Two manageable stones replace one difficult promise. The new fracture surfaces are checked before lifting. One is broad enough for bedding. The other remains rough and will need either dressing or an accommodating gap. The successful split reduces risk as well as total carried weight. The lighter pieces travel separately. You take the first with another carrier and discover that reduced mass does not eliminate awkward shape. Its center of weight lies toward one end. so equal hand positions produce unequal effort. You shift your grip and place the heavier end nearer the stronger shoulder. The path rises again. A person watching from the wall might see only steady progress. Inside the carrying pair, constant small adjustments keep that appearance possible. The block reaches a shaded sorting ground below the working face. It is lowered onto a level bed, not dropped into a heap. A fresh fracture can hide until an impact opens it, and the last careless half-second should not undo the preceding hour. At the sorting ground, you flex your fingers slowly. Grip returns before the next lift, while the delivered block remains exactly where its weight can no longer surprise anyone. At the sorting ground, stones are compared by thickness and likely position. The flattest blocks are not automatically reserved for the most visible wall. Some are valuable because they can cross joints. Thick pieces may belong low in a face or deep in a core. Small, stable stones are kept where packers can reach them without searching through chips. You place the first half with medium-facing blocks. The second half, delivered later, has a sloping underside and joins a group awaiting more dressing. The categories remain practical rather than permanent. A wall gap can promote an unremarkable core stone to the outer course if its bed fits perfectly. The pile serves judgement, it does not replace it. A worker turns one waiting piece upright so its crack can be seen. Hiding weakness inside a pile would merely transfer uncertainty to the mason at the worst possible moment. Tomorrow's gap may overturn today's most likely classification. Another trip begins after the sun has moved higher. This time the candidate at the outcrop is a slab with an excellent surface and excessive thickness. Splitting it thinner might yield two valuable faces, but the seam is uncertain. You tap, listen, and find no consistent change in tone. Heating could create a break, yet not necessarily where you want one. The piece could still serve low in a wall if enough hands carry it. You measure the distance with your eyes, then look at the narrow turn on the path. The block is one size too large to be worth the walk in its present form. That conclusion saves effort only because someone is willing to make it before lifting. The rejected slab is marked with loose chips arranged beside it, a simple signal that the stone has been assessed and should not be offered again unchanged. Weight rejected here never becomes danger on the narrow climb. You try to reduce the thick slab from one end, supports are set carefully, and a line is chosen where a natural weakness approaches the edge. The first blows produce small flakes. The next creates a crack that dives inward instead of running parallel to the face. You stop. Continuing might shatter the useful portion. The slab remains heavy and now has a compromised corner. It is assigned to future use near the quarry, perhaps in a low retaining line or as material for smaller core stones. Refusal again becomes productive. The outcrop offers more granite than any one wall needs, but labour is limited by bodies, daylight, food, and safe footing. A block's availability does not obligate anyone to carry it uphill. The compromised corner may still release several sound packing stones. The judgment concerns today's route and purpose, not a permanent declaration that the granite is useless. Future usefulness is preserved by refusing a destructive final blow. A thinner sheet nearby lifts almost by hand once debris is cleared from its edge. Weather has already done most of the separating. It produces 3 small blocks with little striking. None is impressive, all are portable. You brush them, test for cracks, and place them in a shallow carrier. The load is heavier in total than it looks, because stone maintains a strict policy against appearing as heavy as several pieces together. Even so, the basket sits close to the body and allows a steady pace. On the path, you pass the abandoned thick slab. Its broad face catches the light. It remains beautiful, available, and correctly left behind. The carrier's rim presses against the hip, so you change sides at the halfway rest. Small comforts preserve balance, and balanced steps preserve the blocks inside. The small blocks arrive without incident, and are welcomed immediately by a mason facing a run of narrow gaps. One fits after a single turn, another becomes a deep packing stone, The third waits beside the course. Their efficient journey does not make a famous wall by itself, but it reveals the production system's intelligence. Builders use what the geology offers, assist suitable seams, reduce weight before transport, sort by likely function, and let the wall make the final choice. The process is neither effortless nor crude. It is tuned to local stone and repeated at a scale large enough to transform hillsides into architecture, while leaving many rejected possibilities exactly where they began. The mason's quick fit also confirms the value of quarry sorting. Less weight travelled, fewer blows were needed at height, and the narrow gap receives a stable answer. The path and the wall reward material chosen for actual purpose. Late in the work period, you return once more to the lower path to collect a medium block cached earlier. One edge has shifted from its support and now rests in loose soil. You clear around it before lifting. A rushed grip would place fingers beneath the unstable side. The block comes up cleanly, but after a few steps the carrier head feels the support strap slipping. Both stop. The stone is lowered onto firm ground. The knot is remade, tested, and pulled flat. The delay is ordinary, and that is its importance. Monumental labour is composed of preventable mishaps noticed soon enough to remain delays instead of injuries. After the knot holds, the pair lifts only a handspan and lowers again. That test costs little and proves the support before the path demands full trust. Testing the knot converts caution into a dependable next movement. The final climb is slower because feet are tired. You choose each step before transferring weight. At a smooth patch of granite, the lead carrier places the whole sole rather than the edge. The rear carrier waits until the load steadies. Together you reach the sorting ground and lower the block. A mason turns it, studies the broad face, and decides it should remain for tomorrow's cooler hour. Nobody objects. The day's purpose was not to force every stone into a wall. It was to deliver usable choices without spending bodies carelessly. The block rests in shade, one hand span from the pile where it belongs. The final lowering is coordinated as carefully as the first lift. Tired hands are most likely to release early, so both carriers keep the count until the bed takes everything. The delivered block waits because good timing is another craft decision. On the way down, you pass the slab judged too large for the walk. It is still beside the path, marked by one aborted fracture and a clean patch where hands tested it. Leaving it there is not defeat. Its size, root, crack, and likely usefulness did not agree. Another season may give it a nearer purpose, or weather may open a better seam. For now, the skilled choice is empty hands and sound footing. You descend toward the household areas, while the wall above holds the stones that were worth carrying. Behind you, the outcrop continues to shed layers at its own pace, offering future builders more material and no promise that the most impressive piece will be the right one. The empty descent is lighter, but not careless. Loose sand remains loose sand, and the day's successful choices are allowed to end with both workers returning safely. Open hands at the bottom complete the transport as surely as stone above. By evening, you enter a household space where stone is the frame and earth is the surface most often touched. An adult bends over a dagger floor, a hard finish made from worked earth, smoothing a scuffed patch with a dampened hand and a small rubbing stone. The floor has been swept already, yet one ridge near the hearth catches ash and bare feet. The ordinary goal is to put the household in order before darkness settles fully. Secure grain, receive the cattle, bank the fire, and make room for everyone who will soon want the same doorway. The doorway itself has no wooden panel in this reconstruction, only an opening and moving air. At present it also has two people trying to pass through it from opposite directions, which gives architecture a familiar domestic purpose. The rubbing stone follows the curve of the worn place, pressing damp earth into the shallowest edge first. A person entering with a vessel steps around the work without being asked. The repaired area will carry ordinary traffic by morning, provided nobody decides that this exact moment is ideal for standing on it. You move the grain basket farther from the hearth while the repaired patch firms. Archaeology at Great Zimbabwe preserves dagger floors, house foundations, storage features, grinding stones, and charred grains. Though the exact arrangement of any one household must remain a careful reconstruction, the evidence points to sorghum and millets among the foods carried through dry months. A basket is checked at the rim, then at the base where a small gap would invite loss one grain at a time. The adult tightens the binding and sets the container on a raised, dry support. Stored food is not scenery, it is tomorrow's meal, seed, obligation, and protection against the part of the year when fields no longer answer immediately. The basket's surface bears marks from handling rather than decoration invented for the scene. One binding is rougher where hands lift it. The adult turns that side toward the wall, leaving the stronger grip accessible. The choice makes tomorrow's first movement easier and reduces the chance of dragging the base. Outside the enclosure, cattle are returning with dust along their lower legs. Their arrival is heard before the animals appear. Hooves on firm ground, short calls from herders, a wooden staff touching stone, and the low shifting sound of bodies entering a narrower space. Cattle bones and keeping areas are prominent in the archaeological record, and herds belong to household economies as food, wealth, social resources, and living responsibilities. The adult at the floor pauses, listens, and moves a small vessel away from the entrance. A herd does not need to be wild to reorganize a yard. It needs only to arrive together while people are still deciding where everything else should stand. The herd's return also changes the smell and temperature of the yard. Warm animal bodies enter space that had held afternoon air. Dust reaches the doorway, settles near the swept edge, and gives the adult one final reason to keep the newly smoothed patch protected until it dries. The first animals pass the opening and settle toward the enclosure. One turns broadside at an inconvenient point, making the following cattle bunch behind it. A herder circles calmly and opens space from the other side. No shouting is needed. The animal shifts, the line begins moving, and dust rises against the lower stones. The household adult watches for a young beast that has been favoring one foot. It enters more slowly, but bears weight. The observation is kept for morning. Tonight's consequence is practical. That animal is placed where it will not be pressed by larger bodies. Caring for a herd means noticing small changes before they become hard problems, much as the mason noticed a rock before the wall carried more weight. The young animal's slower placement is remembered without alarm. A herder touches the lower leg briefly, finds no obvious swelling in the dimness, and guides it toward quieter ground. The adult inside hears the change in hoof rhythm and resumes arranging the room only when the line moves freely. With the cattle enclosed, attention returns to grain. A grinding stone lies near the working area, its surface holding fine meal in shallow texture. The day's portion has been prepared, but scattered grains remain on a mat. The adult gathers them with 2 fingers and returns them to the container. Waste is measured in repetition. A few grains ignored each evening become a noticeable absence in the dry season. The basket is covered, the support checked again, and a smaller vessel placed beside it for morning use. The order matters because dawn work begins before anyone wants to search in dim light. What looks like tidiness is a stored sequence of future actions. A second person checks the basket lid, while the first gathers the mat. Agreement comes through overlapping work rather than formal instruction. One pair of hands secures the food, another clears the floor, and neither task is complete until both leave the narrow route around the hearth open. The hearth has burned down to a low bed. A cooking pot is moved aside, and the adult draws ash over the brightest embers, while leaving enough heat to make morning easier. The action must balance 2 needs: prevent sparks from wandering across the floor, but preserve a living center beneath the ash. The repaired ridge nearby is now firm enough not to smear. A hand passes over it once, feeling for roughness. The floor is not merely swept ground. It is renewed through repeated labor, patched where use wears it, and kept hard enough for vessels, feet, mats, and the small traffic of a household gathered inside stone-defined space. The ash is drawn from the cooler edge toward the center. A small red point disappears, then returns when air reaches it. The adult adds a final layer and waits long enough to see that the covering holds. Fire preserved carelessly would turn convenience into risk, so the test is part of banking it. Night does not arrive at Great Zimbabwe as an empty silence. It collects through tasks. One household still pounds grain. Another calls a child from a path. Somewhere metal gives a brief ring before tools are put down. Goats complain in a nearby pen and then stop. Voices travel along walls and through openings, softened by distance and interrupted by cattle shifting their stance. The adult carries a water vessel to the side of the hearth, where it can be reached without crossing sleeping places. The settlement is large enough for thousands of lives, though modern population estimates vary widely. Numbers are less useful here than the layered sound of many households finishing at different speeds. Some sounds belong to distance and cannot be assigned to a single courtyard. That uncertainty is honest. The evidence supports a populous working settlement, not an exact evening soundtrack. The adult's next action remains firm. The water vessel is placed where a sleepy hand will not knock it against stone. The listener's view begins to ease away from direct participation. The adult turns a mat, shakes dust from it outside the doorway, and lays it beside the inner wall. Another person brings a small bundle of fuel for morning and places it where sparks cannot reach. Their movements have been negotiated through habit. One reaches, another waits, then both use the same narrow space without discussion. The doorway holds no curtain now, only night air moving inward and hearth warmth moving out. The exchange changes the room gently. Cooler air settles near the floor. Smoke finds the opening. The adult tests the grain cover once more and lets it remain. The fuel bundle contains pieces already sized for handling. It is set with the driest ends upward, away from damp earth. This is a future-orientated arrangement like the grain support. Night work stores not only objects but also a sequence, allowing morning to begin without unnecessary searching. A child wakes briefly at the sound of a cow pressing against the enclosure. The adult steps outside, listens, and identifies the animal by position and tone rather than by sight. Nothing is wrong. Two cattle have changed places, and one horn has touched the wall. The adult moves a loose branch away from their feet and returns. That small interruption has a consequence inside. The hearth covering is checked because the door was left open longer, and the mat is moved a little farther from the draft. Domestic order is not a fixed arrangement. It is a series of quiet revisions prompted by animals, weather, people, and the materials underhand. The branch outside has likely fallen from ordinary use rather than any larger event. Removing it keeps the enclosure clear. The adult also checks the stone edge where the horn touched and feels no looseness. Satisfied, the person returns through the same opening and leaves the animals to settle. The stored grain remains the adult's main concern. A dry season does not make every evening anxious, but it makes care intelligible. The basket's binding has tightened as fibers cooled, leaving one side slightly tilted on its support. The adult inserts a flat sherd beneath the low edge, then tests whether the vessel rocks. It stays steady. The adjustment keeps the base away from dampness and prevents rubbing against the floor. Archaeology can reveal storage features and plant remains. It cannot recover this exact hand movement. The staging remains plausible and low stakes, offered as one way a person might answer the documented need. The hand withdraws, and the basket keeps its balance. The sherd used as a leveler is broad enough not to cut the basket's base. It is pushed only until the tilt disappears. The adult does not add a second piece once stability is reached. Excess correction could create a new high point, a domestic version of the mason's earlier lesson. Food is shared from the cooking vessel in portions suited to the household. No feast is invented, and no scarcity is dramatized. The meal belongs to an ordinary evening in a farming and herding community. People eat near the hearth, pass the vessel, and leave room for one another on the maintained floor. Cattle outside continue to shift and breathe. Their presence is economic, social, and immediate. A herd can represent wealth in later descriptions, but each animal also needs water, grazing, attention, and enclosure. The adult hears the young beast place its sore foot, pauses, then continues eating when the sound is even. Conversation lowers during the meal, not because the household is solemn, but because tasks have narrowed. A person tears a portion, another passes the vessel, and the adult nearest the doorway continues listening to the cattle. Shared food and shared attention occupy the same small circle of hearth light. After the meal, fragments are gathered rather than left near sleeping places. The vessel is rinsed with a small amount of water and set upside down. Ash is brushed into the hearth. The adult takes the rubbing stone and gives the repaired floor patch a final pass, blending its edge into the older surface. The work is modest but cumulative. Dugger houses and floors required maintenance, just as dry stone walls did. Without it, daily abrasion, water, and use would roughen the surface. With it, the room begins each morning as a workable place again. The adult sets the rubbing stone beside the wall, where a hand can find it by touch. The rinsing water darkens a patch of ground away from the repaired floor. The vessel is angled so its rim can dry. These details are plausible actions around documented pottery and domestic spaces, not claims that archaeology recorded this precise evening. The adult returns at once to the visible patch. The settlement quiets by degrees. Grain pounding ceases in one direction, then in another. A last group returns along a path. Cattle calls become less frequent as animals stand closer together. Hearth light remains visible through several openings, each one dimming on its own schedule. The adult sits at the doorway and listens for unfinished obligations. The stored grain is secure. The young animal is placed safely. Water is near the hearth. The floor patch is set. One task remains, checking that the entrance path is clear for whoever rises first. The adult moves a basket from the threshold and leaves the opening free. The threshold is checked with a foot before the basket is moved. A loose chip is found and placed against the wall, rather than left where a bare heel might meet it. The entrance is now clear both for the first riser and for any quick visit to the enclosure before dawn. A breeze passes through the doorway, cooler now, carrying the smell of dry earth and cattle. The adult draws the mat slightly inward, but does not close the opening. Beyond it, stone walls hold and redirect sound without sealing households from one another. Voices can still be heard, though fewer words are distinguishable. The city has no single switch into night. It settles by practical completion. One fire is covered. One basket is secured. One animal finds space. One floor loses the day's dust. Across a large settlement, the same kinds of endings accumulate until activity becomes low enough that individual sounds stand apart. The breeze briefly makes one ember brighter. The adult draws ash across it without adding fuel. Beyond the opening, another household's conversation ends in the middle distance. The remaining sounds separate into animals, feet, and occasional voices, each less connected to an urgent task than before. The adult lies down, then rises once more because the grain basket has been placed too near the root to the water vessel. In darkness, a shin would find it before a hand did. The basket is shifted the width of a palm. That is the last adjustment. The room now contains a clear path from sleeping mat to doorway, from doorway to cattle, and from mat to hearth. The arrangement is small, but it holds the household's night together. The adult returns to the mat and listens. Outside, a cow exhales close to stone. Another answers farther away. The sounds carry no new problem. The basket's new position also leaves a wider turn for the water vessel. The adult rehearses the path once in low light, moving from mat to hearth and back without touching anything. Practical memory is built through the arrangement itself. After that test, there is no reason to rise again. Embers settle beneath ash. Their light no longer reaches the far side of the room, but the adult knows where the vessels stand by the order just made. The repaired floor cools and hardens. The grain remains raised and covered. Air moves through the open doorway without lifting ash from the hearth. Elsewhere, the last pounding has stopped. A few voices continue, lower and less frequent, then fall away. The settlement does not become perfectly silent. Animals breathe, someone coughs, a foot crosses a yard, and wind touches the wall. The human work, however, has reached its evening payoff. Food, animals, fire and floor are in their places. One coal settles with a faint crack beneath the ash. Nothing flares. The adult recognizes the sound and does not move. Familiar materials no longer require inspection every time they speak. Confidence here comes from the care already taken, not from imagining that the household has become perfectly still. Before full rest, the adult turns toward the enclosure and listens for the uneven step of the younger animal. 4 quiet placements follow, then another 4. The gait is steady enough for the night. Morning will bring a closer look, perhaps a different route to grazing, and another decision made from observation. For now, no action is required. The household remains connected to the herd through sound alone. The adult's hand rests on the hard floor, where the repaired patch meets older earth without a ridge. That smooth boundary is the domestic equivalent of a well-seated stone. Careful work disappearing into ordinary use. The measured hoofbeats fade as the animal shifts farther from the wall. The adult keeps listening until the sequence blends with the rest of the herd. Concern has produced an observation and a morning plan, then released the night. No extra danger is added to keep the story awake. The doorway now holds only air. The hearth is banked, not extinguished. Cattle stand close beyond the stone. Grain waits against the dry months, and the floor carries the quiet weight of sleeping bodies. Across Great Zimbabwe, household after household has gone still in stages rather than all at once. No wall can tell the whole of that life by itself. The living fabric was earth, food, animals, tools, voices, and repeated maintenance inside and outside the stone. This household's goal is complete. The last person to move has already decided who will rise first, and the answer can wait until early light reaches the doorway. The open doorway does not signify absence. It connects maintained interior space with the yard, herd, path, and neighboring sounds already established. As the air cools, each element remains in relation to the others. The episode's descent continues through completed work, rather than through empty scenery. Early light returns, but now an adult approaches the surviving wall in the present. The person's ordinary goal is modest. Follow one course far enough to see what the material can honestly say. Before the hand reaches stone, the ground carries another kind of record. Rain falls seasonally on this part of the plateau, encouraging crops and grass, filling sources, darkening dagger, and changing the work available to people. Dry months favor repair, quarrying, carrying, and building because stone is easier to handle away from heavy rain. Herds must follow grazing and water. Fields demand attention when the season turns. The city's life was therefore rhythmic before it was monumental, organized around recurring needs that no wall could cancel. The visitor notices repaired earth beside stone and understands that wet and dry seasons affect materials differently. Granite carries load through mass, while earthen walls and floors require renewed surfaces after weather and use. The path is quiet, and the recurring sequence of wet ground, dry stone, grazing, and repair remains enough to organize the remembered year. The morning air keeps that sequence gentle rather than dramatic. The adult pauses where runoff has cut a shallow line beside the path. You can imagine no exact medieval morning from that mark, but you can understand the practical sequence supported by landscape and archaeology. Rain renews growth and also tests earthen surfaces. Dry weather opens time for patching floors and adding stone courses, while cattle move toward available grazing. Building labor must fit among cultivation. herding, food processing, craft, exchange, and household obligations. The walls represent concentrated skill and effort, but they did not float above those activities. Their granite was carried by people whose year contained many forms of work, and the city's political importance depended on that broader productive life. Seasonal rhythm does not prescribe one universal calendar for every household. It sets recurring constraints, and people arrange labor within them according to need, status, skill, weather, and the tasks already waiting. People did not wait for one season to finish every task. They adjusted, overlapped, postponed, and resumed work as weather and household needs allowed. That flexibility belongs to ordinary competence within a changing year. Before Great Zimbabwe rose to its greatest prominence, communities across the region had already developed farming, herding, craft, and exchange networks. Mapungubwe, farther south in the Shashe Limpopo region, became an important earlier center before Great Zimbabwe's ascendancy. Stone building traditions then spread through many related sites across the plateau and neighboring lands. The adult's hand reaches a block and rests there. The point is not a simple relay in which one city disappears and another replaces it on a single date. Centers grow, overlap, redirect movement, and retain people after power shifts. Great Zimbabwe was the largest of many stone-walled places, not an isolated exception dropped into an empty landscape. Earlier and later centers were connected by people, practices, and competition, as well as by chronology. The regional tradition makes Great Zimbabwe more intelligible, not less distinctive, because its scale grew from existing Southern African histories. The regional sequence is therefore a history of connected innovation, not a ladder built to make one capital seem inevitable. Nothing in that history requires an outsider to supply the idea. The course beneath the hand belongs to a city that grew over centuries. Occupation began before the most imposing walls, intensified through the medieval centuries, and continued unevenly after the period most often described as its height. Radiocarbon dates and phase sequences differ among excavations, so the careful language is broad. Roughly the 11th through 15th centuries for the main growth and prominence, with occupation in parts of the wider site continuing later. The adult follows the joint between two blocks. One belongs physically beside the other, but their exact placement year is not written on the stone. Archaeology works by ranges, associations, layers, and comparison. Precision is earned where evidence supports it, and declined where it does not. One excavation may sample a walled deposit, another a household area, and each may produce a different sequence. The visitor keeps moving, allowing chronology to remain layered rather than compressed into a single foundation and abandonment date. Uncertainty in dating becomes a reason for ranges and layers, not an invitation to replace evidence with a sharper-sounding year. Ranges protect the record from certainty it has not earned. A small piece of glass found in a household deposit can speak about distance without naming the person who carried it. Glass beads, glazed ceramics from Asia, and goods connected with the Indian Ocean world reached Great Zimbabwe through networks linking the interior to the eastern African coast. Gold and ivory moved outward through related exchanges, while imported objects moved inland through many hands. The surviving items do not prove that foreign merchants designed the city or directed its builders. They show connection. Local households, craftspeople, herders, farmers, intermediaries and leaders incorporated distant goods into local lives. The adult at the wall turns from the course toward the valley, where movement once joined routes extending much farther than the visible horizon. A beads route might include coastal traders, inland intermediaries, gifts, exchange, and reuse. The object records arrival more securely than the exact social path, so the narration preserves the connection without assigning an unsupported itinerary. Distance is present in the object, while the social meaning it acquired at arrival belonged to the people who received and used it. Arrival is secure. The complete chain of possession is not. Trade goods are striking because they survive as hard fragments. but they were never the whole economy. Grain, cattle, cloth, skins, metalwork, labor, gifts, and obligations circulated at local and regional scales, much of it leaving faint archaeological traces. Research increasingly describes production as household-based and mixed, rather than controlled by a single warehouse or a simple royal monopoly. The person at the wall sees no market sign, only stones, paths, and low remains. Evidence asks for proportion. A shard of porcelain confirms far-reaching connection. It does not make imported ceramics the daily center of every home. The city remained locally made, locally fed, and locally maintained while participating in a wider world. Animal bone and grain remains return attention to meals, herds, fields, and storage. Those local materials are abundant enough to resist a story in which distant imports alone explain the city's growth or its importance. The visitor keeps those scales together, a world of long routes resting upon fields, herds, workshops, kitchens, and maintained floors. Local work remains the ground on which distant exchange becomes meaningful. The soapstone birds offer another lesson in limits. The carvings are real, distinctive, and deeply important to Zimbabwe. Their ancient meanings are interpreted rather than documented, and scholars have proposed associations with leadership, ancestors, ritual, and other forms of authority. Several were removed from Great Zimbabwe during the colonial period. Some were later returned. The adult does not touch an object behind glass in this scene. Instead, the person looks toward the hill where such carvings were found and allows the uncertainty to remain. A symbol can survive more visibly than the words once spoken around it. Respect does not require pretending those words are known. The birds' later journeys are documented more clearly than their first meanings. Removal changed context as well as ownership, and return restored presence without restoring every association disrupted by colonial collecting. The returned carvings stand within a national history that includes removal, recovery, and continuing debate about memory, custody, and interpretation. The visitor leaves their first purpose open, as the evidence requires. The great enclosure and its conical tower require the same restraint. Their forms survive, their exact purpose does not. Interpretations include elite residence, ritual use, initiation, and changing combinations of social functions over time. No single reading should be presented as a builder's document. The present visitor follows the outer curve and sees how the wall organizes movement, narrows a passage, screens one space from another, and creates an imposing interior. Those physical effects can be observed. Meaning must be argued from evidence and analogy, then kept open. The distinction does not make the structure less interesting. It keeps the surviving wall from being forced to say more than it can. Observed effects remain valuable. Curving walls can guide feet and visibility. Passages can separate and connect. Those consequences are physical, while the reasons different generations valued them may have changed through time. Physical form can be described in exact language without converting every passage, curve, or tower into a single fixed explanation. Description stays firm precisely because interpretation is allowed to remain provisional. By the later 15th and 16th centuries, political and economic weight was shifting toward other centers, including areas associated with Mutapa to the north and Kami to the southwest. Causes are not reduced to one dramatic failure. Trade routes changed, political relationships altered, populations moved, and local conditions varied. New research also shows that parts of Great Zimbabwe remained occupied after older narratives had declared a sharp ending. The city ebbed, households relocated or persisted, authority gathered elsewhere. Such movement is an ordinary historical process, even when the architecture left behind is extraordinary. The adult steps over a low foundation and notices how one area can fall quiet while another continues in use. No single cause is made to carry the decline. Environmental pressures, route changes, political realignment, and relocation have all been discussed, but current evidence supports a varied transition rather than one sudden collapse. Movement away from one center could open possibilities elsewhere, while leaving older households, shrines, paths, and memories in continued relation to the site. The surviving layers record overlap more readily than a clean final departure. The site remained known and remembered. Local communities maintained ancestral, social, and ritual relationships with the place. European visitors did not discover an unknown city in the 19th century. They entered a landscape already inhabited, named, and understood through local histories. Early treasure hunting and destructive excavation removed objects and damaged layers that might have answered later questions. Some wall sections were also altered through restoration. The visitor's careful pace reflects that complicated fabric. A stone may be ancient, reset, supported, or observed through records of conservation. Modern study must read the monument and the history of what happened to it after building ceased. Local memory and continued use prevent the language of disappearance. Political centrality can move while a place remains named, visited, occupied in part, and important to communities whose histories were too often excluded. The correction is simple but important. Change in authority is not the same thing as a place becoming unknown. Continued memory belongs inside the chronology, not after it. Archaeologists use walls, floors, pottery, animal bone, plant remains, beads, metalworking debris, dated imports, radiocarbon samples, and settlement patterns. Each category answers different questions. A level course demonstrates skilled masonry. A charred seed can identify a crop. A bead can reveal connection and chronology. None alone supplies the city's complete social order. The adult reaches a section where the wall face changes texture. Rather than invent a reason, the person looks for an explanation in construction sequence and conservation records. Knowing how we know is part of the history, but the camera stays with the hand, the footing, and the visible consequence of evidence. A modern aside about method lasts only this scene. The visitor resumes walking immediately, placing a foot beside the course, and watching how the wall's base meets the uneven ground. Every source has a scale. The visitor matches claim to evidence, then lets the next visible action carry the narration onward. Then the hand leaves the altered texture and finds firm footing. Modern archaeological work has also corrected older habits of looking only inside famous walls. Unwalled household areas matter. Daga remains matter. Local Shona concepts and community knowledge matter, though analogies from later periods must still be tested rather than projected unchanged into earlier centuries. The visitor looks away from the highest stonework toward lower ground where domestic life left suppler traces. A city is not measured only by the survival of its hardest material. Granite endures more readily than swept earth, woven fiber, food, wood, and speech. The record is unequal, and interpretation must compensate without inventing what has vanished. Attention to low remains also changes the scale of the story. The visitor can now imagine maintenance spread across courtyards and work areas, without assigning an invented resident to every surviving patch. Low traces ask for slower attention, but they restore the households and work areas that monumental stone alone can overshadow. Domestic traces return human scale to the widest historical claims. The season in the present morning is dry. Grass carries pale light, and the stone is cool beneath the adult's palm. That sensation is not used as proof of a medieval feeling. It simply joins two documented realities. Granite remains, and people continue to approach it in early light. The hand follows one course past a joint, then another. Blocks vary in length and shade. Their top line stays calm. Somewhere beneath them a contact faces no visitor can see, chosen by builders whose names are not preserved. The wall's physical logic remains available even where personal biography does not. The hand pauses at a shallow dressing mark. It proves deliberate shaping more securely than it reveals the mood, name, or exact tool sequence of the person who made it. That pause respects both knowledge and absence. holding what is demonstrable apart from what no surviving record can recover. The fingers move on without giving the scar an invented story. At the end of the accessible run, the adult turns back. The course has crossed centuries of weather, use, collapse in some sections, and careful conservation. It has also crossed changes in power, movement, interpretation, and national meaning. The person does not ask the wall for a single final message. Stone can confirm workmanship, sequence, repair, and endurance. Objects can confirm exchange. Occupation layers can confirm continuity and change. Open questions remain open. That measured reading is enough to replace the old appetite for legends with a more human history of building, maintaining, moving, returning, studying, and remembering. Reading carefully does not drain the sight of feeling. It relocates interest from unsupported claims to the durable relationship between local geology, practiced labor, household life, exchange, and historical change. The resulting history is quieter than legend and fuller than a monument viewed only as an isolated architectural wonder. Careful limits make the surviving human achievement easier to see. The adult stops where the first light reaches the wall face evenly. The hand runs along a course laid by a person never met and never named. The blocks are not identical. One projects slightly, another is narrow, and a third carries the faint scar of dressing. Together they keep the intended line. The visitor's fingers pass over the joints, feeling no mortar because none was required. Behind the visible face, weight continues downward through choices made by eye and hand. The hand reaches the end of the course and rests there. After centuries of change, removal, return, argument, repair, rain and dry weather, the plain fact under the fingers is quiet and exact. The course is still level. The final contact joins present skin to an old working surface without claiming direct access to the builder's thoughts. The level line itself is sufficient evidence of practiced judgment. The level line does not answer every historical problem. It answers the final physical one with complete clarity. The hand accepts that answer and does not demand another. The stone is cool again in the remembered early light. A broad face rests upon the course below, its weight received without movement. Nearby joints narrow and widen, then continue along the curve. Nothing needs to be added to the line. The chosen block remains where careful hands left it, ordinary among other ordinary blocks. Dust lies softly in the smallest edges. The wall leans inward by a little, holding its familiar balance. The hand that tested the stone is gone from the image now, but the settled contact remains. One course supports another. The visible face keeps its quiet run. The remembered morning no longer asks for a better block, another lift, or a final correction. The stone is seated. The gap is closed. The level line continues. The doorway holds only air, as it did after the household work was finished. Coolness gathers near the hard floor. The swept surface meets the older patch without a ridge. Beside the wall, the grain basket stays where it was placed, clear of the path. No hand reaches for it. The route from mat to hearth, from hearth to opening, remains open and known. The doorway neither closes nor calls anyone through. It simply frames the darker yard and the low stone beyond. Air passes inward, then rests. The floor carries no new footsteps. The room is arranged, the threshold is clear, and every familiar object keeps the place already given to it. Under ash, the hearth keeps a small covered warmth. No flame rises, the vessel remains turned aside, the water rests within reach, and the rubbing stone lies close to the floor it smoothed. Outside, cattle stand together beyond the stone. Their weight shifts once, then settles. A breath touches the enclosure and fades into the wider quiet. The younger animal's step no longer needs to be counted. The herd has found its night position. Hearth, floor, doorway, and cattle remain connected by the same calm arrangement, each present without asking the household to begin another task. The course returns in the first pale light, followed by the path from the outcrop and the shaded working pile. A block too large for the climb remains beside the route, while the stones worth carrying rest within the wall. No load moves now. Footing is firm, hands are open, and the sorted pieces wait without urgency. Along the face, one scar of dressing catches the light and then becomes part of the surrounding granite. The curve continues beyond the nearest joint. Broad beds hold beneath the visible surface. Weight passes downward through stone to stone, quietly, without anything poured between them. Early light reaches the wall evenly. The remembered hand follows the level course once more, passing the plain block, the narrow companion, and the settled joints. Then the hand rests, behind the wall of the doorway, the hard floor, the covered hearth, and cattle standing close. No image changes into a new one. They remain together as parts of the same finished night and returning morning. Stone holds stone. Ash covers warmth. Air fills the doorway. Hooves are still. The course keeps its line beneath the resting hand, and the room around you may stay dim for a while longer.